The armory at Camp Liberty always smelled the same: gun oil and metal, the sharp tang of cleaning solvent cutting through the dry heat that rolled in from the desert beyond the perimeter fence. Afternoon light slanted through the high windows, catching dust motes that hung suspended in the still air like tracer rounds frozen mid-flight. General Garrett Blackwood had conducted this same inspection tour every Thursday for the past 18 months. Same route through the facility. Same practiced eye-noting weapon condition, storage protocol compliance, the small details that separated professional soldiers from merely competent ones. He'd been doing inspections like this for 32 years, across 3 continents, in more deployments than he cared to count. The ritual had become muscle memory. The clatter of weapons being cleaned filled the cavernous space, bolt carriers sliding free from receivers, the metallic snap of magazines being loaded and unloaded, the soft whisper of cleaning patches pushed through barrels. Dozens of soldiers worked at their stations, each focused on the weapon in front of them with the kind of attention that would keep them alive when it mattered. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Donovan walked 3 steps behind the general, tablet in hand, making notes on equipment status and supply requisitions. He'd learned to read Blackwood's silences, the slight pauses that meant something had caught the general's attention, the barely perceptible nod that indicated approval. In the far corner of the armory, almost hidden behind a row of weapon racks, a lone figure sat at a maintenance station. The soldier worked with a methodical precision that bordered on ritualistic. Each component of the massive rifle laid out in perfect geometric arrangement. Bolt carrier group to the left. Recoil springs aligned by size. Magazine well facing north. The kind of order that spoke not of regulation compliance, but of something deeper. Something personal. Blackwood noticed the Barrett M8 2A1 first. The 50 caliber rifle was unmistakable, even disassembled. Nearly 30 pounds of precision engineering designed to reach out and touch targets at distances most people couldn't even see clearly. The kind of weapon that separated the exceptional from the merely good. The soldier's hands moved with the confidence of 10,000 repetitions. No wasted motion. Each piece inspected with surgical attention before being set aside. A cleaning patch run through the barrel, held up to the light, examined for the slightest trace of fouling. Then another, and another. The general was about to continue his tour when something caught his eye: the small badge on the soldier's uniform partially visible beneath the desert camouflage blouse. Not prominently displayed on the chest like most qualification badges. This one was placed on the inside pocket flap, visible only when the fabric shifted. He stopped mid-step, took 2 paces closer, read the inscription: 3,200 meters. Confirmed kill. Afghanistan in 2021. Blackwood stared at the numbers. 32 years in the military. He'd worked with some of the most elite units in the American arsenal. Delta operators, SEAL Team 6. The quiet professionals who did the work no one else could do. He'd seen official records of the longest confirmed sniper shots in modern warfare. The current record, as far as he knew, was 2,815 meters. A British sniper in Iraq. That shot had made international headlines, been analyzed in military journals, become the subject of after-action reports that examined every variable that made such a shot possible. 200 meters, that was 2 miles. That was hitting a man-sized target at a distance where atmospheric conditions, the rotation of the Earth itself, became factors in the calculation. That was impossible. Soldier Blackwood, said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made junior enlisted snap to attention even when they weren't being addressed directly. That badge, explain it. The soldier looked up for the first time. Master Sergeant Evelyn Hale had the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. No distinguishing features that would make her memorable in a lineup. Average height, average build, the weathered tan that came from years of deployments in desert regions. Her eyes were pale gray, the color of winter sky, and they held the 1,000-yard stare that marked combat veterans who'd seen too much and processed too little. She followed the general's gaze to the badge, understood what had captured his attention, and set down the bolt carrier she'd been inspecting before standing. Sir, the shot was confirmed by multiple observers and recorded by Mission Command. The engagement occurred on the 15th of March 2021 during a classified operation in the Hindu Kush mountain range. Her voice was flat, matter of fact, the tone of someone reporting the weather, not claiming to have achieved what would be the longest confirmed kill shot in military history. Blackwood felt Lieutenant Colonel Donovan step closer, heard the soft intake of breath that meant his aide had also seen the badge and understood its significance. Soldier, that's impossible, Blackwood said. The words came out harder than he'd intended. The world record for a confirmed sniper kill is 2,815 meters. No one has made a shot at 3,200. Evelyn chose her words carefully, aware that she was navigating classification protocols in an open armory. Sir, with respect, the engagement was verified through proper channels. However, the mission remains classified. The shot isn't in any official public record. As far as open source information and unclassified reporting are concerned, the British record still stands. She paused, gauging the general's reaction. Some capabilities are more valuable when they're not advertised, sir. Adversaries adjust their tactics based on known threats. If they don't know we can reach out that far with precision, they don't take countermeasures. Blackwood understood immediately. This wasn't a soldier bragging about an impossible achievement. This was someone explaining why an extraordinary capability had been kept in the shadows for 3 years. The badge wasn't a boast. It was documentation of something that officially didn't exist. How many people know about this shot, he asked. Mission command, sir. The personnel directly involved in the operation. And now you. The target was designated high value enough that the engagement was worth the risk of eventual classification compromise. But operational security has been maintained. 3 years of carrying proof of an achievement that couldn't be acknowledged. 3 years of being the holder of a record that existed only in classified files that most people would never access. Donovan had pulled out his tablet, was already accessing the personnel database, fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Staff Sergeant Hale, Blackwood said, reading her name tape. I want to understand how someone makes a 200-meter shot when most elite snipers consider anything beyond 1,500 meters an extreme engagement. Evelyn's expression didn't change. If she felt pride or vindication or any emotion at being challenged, it didn't show on her face. Sir, a shot at that distance requires understanding multiple variables that affect projectile trajectory over extended range. Environmental factors include wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, air density variations based on temperature and barometric pressure, humidity effects on powder burn rate. Ballistic considerations include bullet drop compensation at 3,200 meters. The round drops approximately 800 feet, spin drift effects from the rifling, and the Coriolis effect caused by Earth's rotation, which at that distance represents approximately 8 inches of lateral deviation. She delivered this explanation in the same flat tone she'd used before, not showing off, not trying to impress, simply answering the question that had been asked. Blackwood studied her. 24 years of command experience had taught him to read soldiers. The ones who exaggerated their accomplishments always had a tell. A slight hesitation before answering, eyes that flickered away from direct contact, a change in vocal tone that signaled uncertainty. Evelyn Hale showed none of those signs. The shot also requires, she continued, precise range estimation using multiple measurement techniques to verify distance, understanding of the target's movement patterns. Even if the target appears stationary, a human being standing still will still shift position slightly over time. The ability to maintain steady positioning for extended periods while waiting for optimal environmental conditions, and the patience to not take the shot until all variables align. Donovan looked up from his tablet. Sir, I'm pulling up Staff Sergeant Hale's basic service information. The accessible portions of her file show Army Sniper School, graduated top of class in marksmanship, advanced courses in long-range precision, shooting, ballistic computation, specialized reconnaissance. Unit assignments include, he paused, reading. Sir, most of her deployment history is classified above what I can access here. Blackwood absorbed this information while continuing to study Evelyn. She'd returned her attention to the Barrett had picked up the bolt carrier group, but hadn't resumed work, waiting for the conversation to conclude before returning to the task that had been interrupted. How long did you wait, Blackwood asked, for those optimal conditions in Afghanistan? 8 hours and 17 minutes, sir, from the time we established position to the moment the shot was taken. 8 hours, lying motionless in a sniper hide at altitude in hostile territory. Monitoring environmental conditions, running calculations, waiting for the single moment when every variable aligned and the impossible became briefly possible. How many hours do you spend on that rifle? Blackwood asked, nodding toward the Barrett. 3 hours daily, sir. Complete disassembly, component inspection, cleaning, lubrication, reassembly function. Check. Every day? Yes, sir. Why 3 hours regulation maintenance can be completed in 45 minutes. For the first time, something flickered in Evelyn's expression. Not quite emotion, but a crack in the professional mask. Sir, this weapon is capable of eliminating threats at distances that challenge the laws of physics. It weighs 29 pounds and fires a projectile that can penetrate light armor at over a mile. The tolerances required for that kind of precision are measured in thousandths of an inch. If I don't maintain it perfectly, it won't perform when I need it to. She paused, choosing her words carefully. And if it doesn't perform, then I fail the mission. I fail my team. I fail the people who are counting on me to do the one thing no one else can do. The 3 hours weren't about regulation compliance. They were about control, about reducing every variable she could control to zero so that when the uncontrollable variables, wind temperature, target movement came into play, she'd still have a chance. Blackwood understood obsession. He'd seen it in the best soldiers he'd commanded, the ones who stayed up late studying tactics, who ran extra miles because the standard PT test wasn't enough, who treated every training exercise like actual combat because they understood that how you train is how you fight. But this was different. This was a soldier who'd internalized responsibility at a level that went beyond duty. This was someone carrying weight that didn't show up on any official record. "Oh, sorry," Blackwood said, making a decision. "I want to see a demonstration. Can you show me what kind of precision shooting is possible with your equipment and training?" Evelyn hesitated, the first real hesitation she'd shown since the conversation began. "Sir, a demonstration would require appropriate range facilities with adequate distance and clear firing lanes. It would need coordination with range control for safety protocols, airspace clearance, and target systems. And it would require authorization from my chain of command." "I'll handle the authorization," Blackwood said, the tone that made it clear this wasn't a request. "Lieutenant Colonel Donovan, I want you to coordinate with range control. Whatever Staff Sergeant Hale needs in terms of distance target systems and safety protocols, make it happen." Donovan nodded, already making notes on his tablet. "Sir, our longest range here at Camp Liberty is 1,200 meters. If she needs the full 3,200 for a proper demonstration, we'll have to coordinate with off-base facilities or request special authorization for extended range operations." "Then we start with 1,200, Blackwood said. He looked back at Evelyn. "That's still well beyond what most snipers would consider a standard engagement distance. Can you work with that?" "Yes, sir." 1,200 meters is within the effective range of the M8-2A1 and will allow demonstration of precision shooting capabilities while remaining within your current facilities. Blackwood started to turn away, then stopped. "One more question. How many confirmed kills do you have, Staff Sergeant?" Another flicker in those gray eyes, brief as summer lightning. 41 confirmed, sir, over 24 years of service. Not the hundreds that snipers in Hollywood movies racked up. Not the inflated numbers that showed up in unauthorized biographies and breathless magazine articles. 41 human beings, each one verified through proper channels, each one representing a decision that had consequences beyond the immediate tactical situation. 41 faces that she probably saw when she closed her eyes. "Carry on, soldier," Blackwood said, using the phrase that indicated his inspection was complete and she could return to her work. Evelyn came to attention, rendered a precise salute, and sat back down at her maintenance station. Her hands resumed their work as if the interruption had never occurred. Bolt carrier sliding into receiver. Locking lugs engaging. The soft click of metal on metal that spoke of perfect fit and proper function. As Blackwood walked away, Donovan fell into step beside him. "Sir, what did you see?" the lieutenant colonel asked quietly. Blackwood was silent for a moment, watching soldiers work at their stations. The familiar rhythm of weapons maintenance that had remained unchanged since he was a young lieutenant learning these same skills. "I saw someone who's been carrying weight we don't see," he finally said. "And I want to understand what American sniper capabilities look like when they're employed at that level. Should I request her complete service record?" "Do it. Request special access clearance. I want to know who we have here and what she's actually capable of." 2 days later, the demonstration took place at Camp Liberty's extended range facility. The range had been constructed in a natural depression between two ridges, providing both safety isolation and realistic topography for long-distance shooting. The high desert terrain created clear sight lines for over a mile. At the far end, 1,200 meters from the firing line targets had been set up standard human silhouettes at varying heights to simulate real-world conditions. General Blackwood arrived with several members of his staff, all eager to observe precision shooting that would help them understand capabilities they'd only read about in after-action reports. The morning air was still cool, though the sun climbing over the eastern ridge promised heat by midday. Evelyn had spent the pre-dawn hours preparing her equipment. The Barrett M8-2A1 lay on a shooting mat alongside advanced optical systems that looked more like something from a science laboratory than a combat weapon. a laser rangefinder that could measure distance to within a meter at over 2 miles, a ballistic computer no larger than a smartphone, but containing algorithms that factored in hundreds of variables, a Kestrel weather meter that measured wind speed direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and altitude, all the technology that turned long-range precision shooting from art into science. But technology was only part of the equation. Evelyn also had a notebook pages filled with handwritten calculations and environmental observations. Wind speed at ground level, at mid-level, at the estimated altitude where the bullet's trajectory would apex. Temperature gradients across the 1,200-meter distance. The density-altitude calculation that affected how the air would slow the projectile. A younger soldier stood nearby, Sergeant First Class Wade Sullivan, assigned as spotter for the demonstration. He was 40 years old, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been doing this work longer than his rank suggested. Wade had the kind of face that recorded weather, and experienced laugh lines at his eyes that suggested he'd learned to find humor in difficult places. He carried his own set of optics, his own notebook, his own set of calculations. The spotter's job was to verify what the shooter was seeing, to provide independent confirmation of environmental conditions, to call corrections if the first shot missed. Though judging by the badge on Evelyn's uniform, first shots didn't miss. "General," Evelyn said as Blackwood approached. She'd been monitoring weather conditions for the past hour, recording data with methodical precision. "Target is positioned at exactly 1,200 meters, verified by laser rangefinder and GPS coordinates. Weather conditions are optimal, minimal wind at ground level, clear visibility, stable atmospheric pressure. I'm ready to demonstrate precision engagement capabilities when you give the authorization." Blackwood looked downrange through binoculars. Even with magnification, the target was small. A dark silhouette against the pale desert hardpan. At 1,200 meters, over 3/4 of a mile, a human being would be barely visible to the naked eye. The target itself was only 24 inches wide at the shoulders. Hitting it would require precision that most infantry soldiers couldn't imagine. "How long will your final preparation take?" he asked. "Sir, I've been monitoring environmental conditions since 0600. Current prep will take approximately 15 minutes for final calculations and equipment setup." Blackwood checked his watch. "Proceed when ready." What followed was a masterclass in methodical precision that had nothing to do with Hollywood drama and everything to do with applied physics and disciplined preparation. Evelyn set up a small weather station at the firing point, an anemometer to measure wind speed spinning gently in the morning breeze, a compass to verify exact azimuth to target, a thermometer for current temperature. She recorded each reading in her notebook, cross-referenced them with readings Wade was taking at different positions along the range. "Wind at firing point 2.3 miles per hour right to left," Wade called out, watching a flag placed at the 200-meter mark. "Mid-range showing 3.1, target area showing 2.8 based on vegetation movement." Evelyn noted the numbers. Wind wasn't constant across distance. At 1,200 meters, the bullet would pass through different wind conditions at different points in its flight. Each variation had to be calculated and accounted for. She consulted the ballistic computer, entering data with practiced efficiency. Ammunition type 750, grain AMAX match rounds, selected from a batch that had shown the most consistent performance during previous range sessions. Muzzle velocity 2,800 feet per second, verified through chronograph testing. Ballistic coefficient, a complex number that described how efficiently the bullet moved through air. Range 1,200 meters, verified through multiple measurement methods. Current environmental conditions. The computer processed this information, displayed a firing solution. Elevation adjustment needed 24. 3 minutes of angle the measurement snipers used to describe how much they needed to adjust their scope to compensate for bullet drop. At 1,200 meters, the bullet would fall nearly 60 feet from its initial trajectory. Windage adjustment 1.7 MOA. Right accounting for the gentle crosswind that was barely noticeable at ground level, but would push the bullet several inches off course over the distance it would travel. But Evelyn didn't just trust the computer. She pulled out her notebook, worked through the calculations by hand. Long equations that factored in gravitational acceleration, air resistance, wind drift, the math that underpinned the computer's algorithms, verifying that the technology was giving her accurate information. This was the discipline that separated good shooters from exceptional ones, understanding the science well enough to verify the tools. Wade watched through his spotting scope, a high-magnification optic mounted on a tripod that allowed him to observe the target and call shot impacts. He made his own observations, compared them with Evelyn's data. "Environmental conditions stable," he reported. "No mirage visible. Target clear, wind holding steady. They'd worked together before Blackwood realized watching the practice communication. This wasn't two soldiers meeting for the first time. This was a team that had developed rhythm through repetition. Evelyn nodded, made a final note, then settled into position behind the Barrett. The rifle rested on a bipod, its weight distributed to minimize movement. She adjusted the buttstock to fit her shoulder, settled her cheek against the rest, found the proper eye relief distance where the scope's image was crisp and clear. Through the scope, the target appeared larger but still small. The reticle not actually cross-shaped, but rather a complex grid with multiple aiming points, and range estimation references floated in the center of her vision. She reached up, adjusted the elevation turret. Each click represented a quarter minute of angle. 97 clicks to get the 24.3 MOA the ballistic computer had calculated. Then the windage turret, 7 clicks, right. General, she said, not moving from her position, eyes still on the scope. I'm ready to engage. Would you like me to explain what I'm doing as I execute the shot? Yes, Blackwood said. He was genuinely curious, now wanted to understand the process. Sir, I'm controlling my breathing. Respiratory pause, the natural moment between exhale and inhale when the body is most still, provides the optimal moment to break the shot. I'm also monitoring my heartbeat. The pulse creates small movements that can affect precision at this distance. Timing the shot between heartbeats minimizes that variable. Her voice was calm, clinical, describing the physical discipline required to become a stable shooting platform. The crosshair is currently positioned on empty air in front of and above the target. This compensates for bullet drop and the time the projectile will spend in flight. At 1,200 meters, flight time will be approximately 1.8 seconds. The scope adjustment accounts for trajectory, but I'm also making final corrections based on real-time observation of environmental conditions. Blackwood watched through binoculars, could see Evelyn's position, solid and unmoving, could see the massive Barrett, its barrel extending forward toward a target that was impossibly far away. Evelyn took a breath, released it slowly, the natural pause as her lungs emptied. Her finger moved to the trigger, curled around it with practiced pressure. The moment between heartbeats, the Barrett's report shattered the morning silence. The .50 caliber round produced a muzzle blast that hit like a physical blow even at 20 feet. The concussive wave kicked up dust, sent a ripple through the air that was visible as distortion. The rifle's recoil rocked back against Evelyn's shoulder, absorbed by proper positioning and the weapon's effective muzzle brake system, but still substantial enough that an unprepared shooter would have been knocked off target. A cloud of dust and propellant smoke filled the firing point. The smell of burned powder, sharp and acrid, filled the air. Downrange, impossibly far away, almost lost in the morning haze, the target jerked. Impact center mass, Wade reported, watching through his spotting scope. His voice carried the tone of someone confirming something he'd already known would happen. Approximately 2 inches low, 1 inch left of center, within acceptable precision parameters for this range and conditions. Blackwood stared through his binoculars, adjusted focus, trying to see the impact clearly at this distance. The target showed damage in the center of the silhouette, a clean hit at 1,200 meters, 3/4 of a mile, a shot that most infantry soldiers wouldn't even attempt with their standard-issue rifles. Evelyn worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. The brass tumbled through the air, landed on the shooting mat with a metallic clink. She engaged the safety, kept the rifle pointed downrange, then glanced at Wade. Spotter confirmed center mass, Wade said. Shot was good. Evelyn cleared the weapon, ensured it was safe, then stood. Sir, that was a single demonstration shot at 1,200 meters under optimal conditions. The environmental factors were favorable: minimal wind variance, clear visibility, stable atmospheric pressure. Would you like me to engage multiple targets or demonstrate shooting under more challenging scenarios? Blackwood lowered his binoculars. Impressive didn't begin to cover what he'd just witnessed: the technical knowledge, the methodical preparation, the casual precision of placing a round center mass at a distance where most people couldn't even identify what they were looking at. But something else struck him: the complete lack of emotion. Evelyn had just demonstrated extraordinary capability, and her expression hadn't changed. No satisfaction, no pride, just professional competence, treating this like any other task. That was impressive, Staff Sergeant, he said. But you're telling me you can make that same shot at nearly 3 times this distance? Sir, longer distances present additional challenges. Increased environmental sensitivity due to longer flight time. More complex ballistic computation because errors compound over distance. Greater potential for variables to shift during the bullet's flight. But the basic principles remain the same. She paused, and for the first time, Blackwood saw something in her eyes that might have been the weight of experience. And with proper preparation, proper equipment, optimal conditions, and she chose the next word carefully, sufficient patience to wait for those conditions to align. Yes, sir. 3 times this distance is possible. Show me, Blackwood said. Then realizing how that sounded, he amended, not today, but I want to understand this capability. I want to know what it takes to make shots that most people think are impossible. He turned to Wade. Sergeant Sullivan, how long have you been working with Staff Sergeant Hale? Wade glanced at Evelyn, received a barely perceptible nod. 15 years, sir, on and off various deployments. We've worked together on specialized assignments. 15 years. That was longer than most marriages. That was a partnership built on trust, developed through experiences that probably existed in the same classified files that Blackwood couldn't access. And in those 15 years, how many times have you seen her miss? Wade's answer came without hesitation. Never on a shot she decided to take, sir. There have been times when she evaluated the conditions and chose not to engage. But when she takes the shot, it hits. The distinction was important. Evelyn didn't make impossible shots because she attempted every shot presented to her. She made impossible shots because she only attempted the ones she could make. The discipline to say no was as important as the skill to say yes. Blackwood looked at the target downrange, the small silhouette with a fresh hole punched through its center. Hale, he said, I want to see your complete service record, all of it, including the classified materials. Evelyn's expression became more guarded. Sir, accessing my complete records would require authorization at levels above my clearance to discuss. The missions exist in compartmentalized files. I can tell you that proper channels exist for requesting access, but approval isn't guaranteed. Then I'll navigate those channels. Yes, sir, if I may make one observation. Go ahead. The reason those files are classified isn't to hide success or cover failure. It's because some capabilities work better when adversaries don't know they exist. If you pursue access to that information, you'll understand why, but you'll also understand why it needs to stay compartmentalized. Blackwood nodded. He'd spent enough years in the military to understand operational security. Some secrets were kept not because they were shameful, but because they were valuable. Understood. Carry on with your duties. As the general and his staff departed, Wade began helping Evelyn break down the equipment. They worked in practiced silence, each knowing what needed to be done without discussion. That went well, Wade finally said, packing the ballistic computer into its case. Depends on your definition of well, Evelyn replied. She was cleaning the Barrett's bore, running patches through until they came out clean. He's going to request the files, which means someone at JSOC is going to get questions they'd prefer not to answer. You could have missed the shot, probably would have ended his curiosity. Evelyn looked at him, one eyebrow raised. Wade grinned. Yeah, okay. You couldn't miss if you tried, but you could have declined the demonstration. Medical issue, equipment malfunction, something. And then he would have been even more curious. At least now he's seen that it's possible. Maybe that satisfies him. You know it won't, Wade said. He's the type who keeps pulling threads until he understands the whole picture. Evelyn finished cleaning the barrel, started reassembling the rifle. Then I guess someone will have to decide how much of the picture he gets to see. What neither of them knew was that decision had already been made 3,000 miles away by people who monitored these situations very carefully. General Garrett Blackwood spent the next week learning that some doors required more than rank to open. The initial request went through standard channels. A formal inquiry to Personnel Command requesting full service records for Master Sergeant Evelyn Hale. The response came back within hours, automated and impersonal. Most requested files classified above requester's access level. Submit justification and security clearance verification. Blackwood submitted the paperwork. Waited. Got bounced to a different office. Submitted more paperwork. Waited longer. Got transferred to someone who wouldn't give their name, only a secure extension, and a request for written justification of operational necessity. He'd been in the military long enough to recognize the pattern. These weren't normal classification protocols. This was someone actively preventing access. The kind of roadblocks that appeared when you started asking questions about operations that some people preferred stayed buried. On the 4th day, he called in a favor from an old friend at JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, the organization that oversaw the most sensitive military operations. The kind of missions that didn't appear in official reports and were discussed only in secure facilities with proper clearances. Garrett, you're poking at something that has about 6 different tripwires around it. his friend told him over a secure line. What's your interest in Reaper? Reaper. That's her call sign in certain circles. You've got one of our Tier 0 assets assigned to your facility for administrative convenience. She's there because she needs to be somewhere, and Camp Liberty is far enough from DC that most people won't notice her. But her operational chain of command doesn't run through you. I just want to understand what I have here. What you have there is someone who solves problems that conventional forces can't address. That's all you need to know. I need to know more than that. A long silence. Then I'll make a call, but Garrett understands something. Once you see inside this particular box, you can't unsee it, and you might not like what you find. On the sixth day, Blackwood received a phone call from a number that didn't appear on caller ID. A woman's voice he didn't recognize told him his request had been approved. A courier would deliver the files to his office at 0600 hours the following morning. The files would remain in his possession for exactly 4 hours. He would not make copies. He would not take notes that left his office. He would not discuss the contents with anyone lacking proper clearance. Then the line went dead. The courier arrived at precisely 6 a.m. A young captain with eyes that had seen more than his rank suggested carrying a locked case that probably cost more than most cars. He requested General Blackwood's identification, verified it against a photograph on a tablet that showed biometric confirmation data, then handed over the case in a signature form with classification markings Blackwood rarely encountered. Sir, the case locks automatically at 1,000 hours. At that time, I'll return to retrieve it. Any documents inside will be considered classified material and must remain secured. Blackwood signed. The captain left. The general locked his office door, drew the blinds, and opened the case. Inside were 4 folders, each marked with classification levels that made his security clearance look pedestrian, each containing a service record that read less like a military career and more like a catalog of impossible achievements executed in the shadows. The first folder was biographical information. Evelyn Marie Hale, born April 17, 1981, in Whitehall, Montana. Population approximately 1,100 people spread across ranch country where the nearest neighbor might be 5 miles away. Father was a hunting guide who supplemented income with ranch work. Mother was a school teacher at the local elementary school. Grew up in country where learning to shoot wasn't a hobby, but a necessary skill for putting food on the table and protecting livestock from predators. The psychological assessment from her recruitment included an interesting note. Subject demonstrates exceptional spatial awareness and calculation abilities. During testing, she was able to estimate distances with accuracy exceeding laser rangefinder measurements. When asked to explain her methodology, she described an intuitive process of comparing object sizes, atmospheric clarity, and angular relationships that she developed growing up in open country where misjudging distance could mean not recovering game or getting caught miles from home in bad weather. Not superhuman, just skills developed through necessity in an environment that rewarded accuracy and punished mistakes. Enlisted in the Army in July 2000 at age 19. Basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. Standard progression for a young soldier with no connections and no particular advantages beyond rural work ethic and self-reliance learned from growing up in country that didn't forgive errors. But then the record became less standard. Marksmanship qualification scores that her drill sergeants flagged as abnormal. Not just high scores, plenty of recruits achieved expert qualification, but consistency that suggested something beyond normal aptitude. 20 shots at various distances, all 20 within a 2-inch group. Repeated multiple times with identical results. One shot after another, mechanical precision that didn't degrade under pressure or fatigue. One instructor had written a physical note scanned into the digital record. This private has spatial awareness and calculation abilities I've never encountered in 20 years of training soldiers. She can estimate wind speed by watching grass movement and compensate for it instinctively. She calculates trajectory corrections faster than most soldiers can read them from ballistic tables. Strongly recommend advanced assessment for specialized training. That assessment led to sniper school, where Evelyn graduated top of her class but not through natural talent. The instructor's nose painted a picture of someone who achieved excellence through obsessive dedication that actually concerned some evaluators. She would stay on the range after mandatory training ended, firing hundreds of additional rounds, recording every shot in notebooks filled with calculations and environmental observations. One instructor wrote SSG Hale's approach to marksmanship borders on compulsive. She maintains detailed logs of every shot fired, every environmental condition, every variable that affected outcome. This level of data collection and analysis exceeds professional dedication and suggests she's trying to eliminate uncertainty through sheer volume of preparation. Psychologically, she appears to be developing shooting as a coping mechanism for control in uncontrollable situations. From sniper school, she went to advanced courses that most soldiers never knew existed. Long-range precision shooting, ballistic science taught by instructors with PhDs in physics, meteorological factors and trajectory calculation, classes where the prerequisites included calculus and an understanding of fluid dynamics, and then deployments. The second folder contained mission records, not all of them just the ones that had been declassified enough for someone at Blackwood's level with special authorization. Even heavily redacted, they painted a picture of a soldier whose capabilities had been employed only in situations where conventional approaches had failed, and the consequences of continued failure were unacceptable. The first detailed mission report was dated September 23, 2018. Location redacted, but context suggested somewhere in the Middle East theater during ongoing counterterrorism operations. A high-value target had been identified in a civilian area market district, densely populated, hundreds of non-combatants present at any given time. Intelligence indicated the target was planning an imminent attack using a suicide vest containing enough military-grade explosive to level an entire city block. Conventional assault was impossible. Too many civilians. Too much risk of the target detonating the vest if cornered. Airstrikes were ruled out for the same reason. Explosive ordnance disposal teams couldn't get close enough to attempt a remote disabling. The target needed to be eliminated with surgical precision from a distance that prevented any possibility of triggering the dead man switch that intelligence suggested was connected to the detonator. Evelyn had been given the mission, distance to target 100 meters. Blackwood read the report twice trying to imagine the scenario. The environmental conditions alone would have made most snipers refuse the mission. A sandstorm was rolling in from the west, visibility degrading by the hour. Wind speeds were inconsistent, gusting from multiple directions as the storm front approached. Temperature fluctuations of 20 degrees across the engagement distance as the cooler storm air met the desert heat. The technical notes in the file explained how Evelyn had solved what seemed like an unsolvable equation. She'd established position on a rooftop overlooking the target area 6 hours before the planned shot. Spent that time monitoring environmental conditions, waiting not for optimal conditions. Those weren't coming, but for the brief window when the chaos would become predictable. She'd calculated that the sandstorm's leading edge would create a specific pattern. The initial dust would reduce visibility to unacceptable levels. But there would be a transition period, maybe 20 minutes, when the sand in the air would actually help. The particles would create visible tracers she could use to judge wind direction and velocity at multiple altitudes. The technique required waiting for exactly the right density of airborne sand, too little, and there wouldn't be enough visual data, too much, and she wouldn't be able to see the target. The shot had been taken at 1847 hours during that narrow window. Single round. Target eliminated instantly with catastrophic head trauma that prevented any voluntary muscle movement that might have triggered the vest detonator. The suicide vest was later recovered intact by EOD teams. Post-mission analysis indicated that 37 civilians had been in the immediate blast radius, with hundreds more in the secondary damage zone. All survived because one soldier had the skill and patience to wait 6 hours for a 20-minute window of opportunity. The after-action report included a note from the mission commander SSG Hale's precision under impossible conditions prevented a mass casualty event and eliminated a high-value target who had been evading capture for 8 months. Her ability to execute in non-permissive environmental conditions exceeded anything I've encountered in 22 years of special operations. Recommend for commendation. There was no record of any commendation being awarded. This kind of work didn't generate medals that could be displayed publicly. Just another redacted file in a locked case. The folder contained other missions, each one following a similar pattern. Conventional approaches exhausted. Environmental or tactical constraints making the mission nearly impossible. Evelyn provided as the solution of last resort, a hostage rescue where she'd eliminated a guard from 1,850 meters, allowing a Delta Force team to breach without the hostages being executed. The guard had been holding a radio that would have alerted other militants if he'd seen the assault team approach. Evelyn's shot had been timed to the second too early, and other guards would have noticed his absence too late, and the assault team would have been compromised. She'd waited in position for 11 hours for the exact moment when the guard was alone and distracted. A counter-sniper operation where she'd eliminated an enemy marksman who had been terrorizing a civilian population. The target was another trained sniper who understood counter-sniper tactics and had remained undetected for 3 weeks. Evelyn had outweighted him, outthought him, and eventually outshot him at 2,400 meters. The technical notes indicated she'd spent 4 days in position, watching patterns, calculating probabilities, waiting for the enemy sniper to make a mistake. An urban warfare scenario where she'd provided precision fire support for a special operations team conducting a high-risk raid. 5 different shots at ranges between 800 and 1,600 meters, each one eliminating a threat that would have compromised the mission. The report noted that all 5 shots were made within a 12-minute window, requiring rapid recalculation of ballistic solutions as she engaged targets at different distances and angles. 41 confirmed kills over 24 years, not the hundreds that fiction portrayed. Just 41 human beings who had been designated as threats requiring elimination at ranges where most soldiers couldn't even see them clearly enough to identify them. Blackwood checked his watch. He'd been reading for 90 minutes. Still had 2.5 hours before the case locked and the files disappeared back into whatever classified archive they'd come from. He opened the third folder. This one was different. Not mission reports, but personnel evaluations, psychological assessments, and correspondence between various levels of command discussing how best to employ this particular asset. One document caught his attention immediately. A memorandum dated 3 years ago, classified top secret, addressed to someone whose name had been redacted, but whose title was visible: Commander, Joint Special Operations Command. The memo discussed the strategic value of maintaining Tier 0 capabilities assets that existed outside normal command structures employed only when conventional special operations forces couldn't achieve the objective. The memo specifically referenced Reaper Actual and discussed the ethical implications of using a single individual for missions that carried such high strategic weight. Blackwood read the memo 3 times. Understanding, growing with each pass, the employment of individual specialists at Tier 0 level presents unique challenges. Unlike team-based operations where responsibility is distributed and psychological burden is shared, these individuals carry the full weight of mission success or failure. The isolation inherent in this role, combined with the extreme precision required, creates psychological stresses that standard mental health evaluations may not adequately address. Reaper Actual has demonstrated exceptional technical capability and mission success across 41 confirmed engagements. However, recent psychological evaluations suggest increasing emotional detachment and obsessive-compulsive behaviors related to equipment maintenance and environmental monitoring. While these behaviors do not currently impact mission performance, they indicate coping mechanisms that may not be sustainable long-term. Recommendation: continue employment of Reaper Actual for strategic-level missions, but implement enhanced psychological support and consider reducing mission frequency to allow for adequate processing time between engagements. Someone had responded to the memo. The response was mostly redacted, appearing only as black bars across the page. But one sentence was visible: request approved, asset authorized for continued employment with enhanced oversight and reduced operational tempo. Reaper Actual. They'd given her a call sign that described what she did, what she'd become. A soldier who reached out across impossible distances and ended threats that no one else could touch. But the memo revealed something the mission reports hadn't: the personal cost of being that weapon. Blackwood found another document, a psychological evaluation from 6 months after the Afghanistan mission, the one that had earned her the 200-meter badge. The evaluation was clinical, written by someone with credentials that suggested they specialized in combat stress and trauma. But between the professional language, Blackwood could read what wasn't being said directly. Subject maintains professional composure and demonstrates continued operational capability. However, she reports increasing difficulty with sleep, persistent intrusive thoughts related to past engagements, and heightened anxiety regarding future missions. Subject has developed elaborate pre-mission rituals that she describes as necessary preparation, but which may represent obsessive-compulsive coping mechanisms. When asked about the emotional impact of her work, Subject became defensive and redirected conversation to technical aspects of marksmanship. She appears unwilling or unable to process the psychological reality of her role. Subject's primary relationship is with her weapon, which she maintains with ritualistic precision that exceeds professional requirements. Assessment: Subject is fit for continued duty, but would benefit from mandatory counseling sessions and reduced operational tempo. Subject's coping mechanisms, while currently functional, may not be sustainable if mission frequency continues at current levels. The evaluation was dated 4 months ago. Blackwood wondered if Evelyn had received the recommended counseling. Suspected she hadn't. Soldiers like her didn't do well with therapy that tried to make them question the work they did. He found the Afghanistan file, the mission that had earned her the badge that started this whole investigation. The operation had been classified at levels that made everything else look pedestrian. Even this summary, prepared specifically for his review, was heavily redacted. But the outline was clear enough. March 2021. A high-value target had been operating from a fortified compound in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The target was planning coordinated attacks on coalition facilities throughout the region, attacks that intelligence suggested would result in mass casualties and potentially trigger a significant escalation in regional conflict. The compound was inaccessible to conventional assault. Terrain made vehicle approach impossible. Helicopter insertion would be detected by the sophisticated air defense systems the militants had acquired. Airstrikes would destroy the compound, but also kill civilian hostages being held there, hostages whose families had significant political connections that made their deaths unacceptable from a strategic perspective. Someone in the chain of command had made a decision. If conventional approaches wouldn't work, try the unconventional. If the mission couldn't be accomplished by a team, try a single shooter with capabilities at the very edge of what technology and training made possible. Evelyn had been given 4 days to plan. The mission required infiltration to a mountain position that overlooked the compound. The firing position would be at 15,200 feet altitude. The target location was at 14,400 feet. Distance 3,187 meters later, rounded to 3,200 for the badge. The technical challenges were documented in clinical detail. At that altitude, oxygen deprivation affected everything. Cognitive function degraded. Fine motor control became difficult. The variability to perform the complex calculations required for extreme range precision was compromised by the thin air. The environmental factors were equally challenging. Mountain winds were chaotic, changing direction and velocity with altitude and time of day. Temperature swings of 40 degrees between day and night, atmospheric conditions that made ballistic calculations more art than science. Evelyn had spent 2 days acclimatizing to the altitude before the mission, conducted practice shots at similar elevations to understand how the thin air would affect bullet trajectory, developed contingency calculations for various environmental scenarios. The infiltration took another 2 days. Moving at night, avoiding detection, carrying equipment that weighed nearly 70 pounds across terrain that would challenge an experienced mountaineer even without the load. She'd established position 36 hours before the intelligence window. The reports indicated the target would be vulnerable for a narrow period between 12 and 24 hours before relocating to a different facility. If she missed that window, the opportunity would be gone and the planned attacks would proceed. Blackwood read the hour-by-hour log she'd maintained. 36 hours of monitoring environmental conditions, recording wind speeds, tracking temperature changes, watching the target through optics, learning patterns, identifying the moment when he would be vulnerable. The log entries became more terse as time progressed. Hour 20, wind patterns chaotic, waiting for stability. Hour 28, target visible, conditions non-permissive. Holding. Hour 34, thermal shift creating predictable wind pattern. Preparing for possible engagement window. The shot had been taken at hour 36. The log entry was clinical environmental conditions aligned. Target exposed. Engagement executed at 0847 local time. Range 387 meters. Flight time 7.1 seconds. Target eliminated. Hostages subsequently recovered by ground team. Mission success, 7 seconds. The bullet had spent 7 seconds in the air, traveling over 2 miles, dropping more than 800 feet from its initial trajectory, being pushed by winds that shifted across that distance, affected by the Coriolis effect of Earth's rotation. And it had hit exactly where Evelyn had calculated it would. But there was more to the file, a personal statement that hadn't made it into the official record, but had been preserved in her personnel folder. Blackwood almost missed it, tucked at the back of the Afghanistan file. It was handwritten, scanned into the digital record. Evelyn's neat printing, each letter carefully formed. Mission accomplished. Target eliminated. Hostages recovered. From a tactical perspective, this operation represents successful employment of extreme-range precision capabilities. From a personal perspective, I need to write something that won't go in the official report. I watched that man for 36 hours. I watched him pray. I watched him interact with subordinates. I watched him eat. I watched him exhibit all the behaviors that reminded me he was a human being, not just a designated target. I know what he was planning. I know the intelligence reports. I understand he was responsible for operations that killed innocent people. I'm not questioning whether the mission was justified. But when I pulled that trigger, I ended a human life from 2 miles away. He never knew I was there. never had a chance to defend himself. I made a decision that he didn't get to participate in, and 7 seconds later he was dead. The fact that he deserved it doesn't change the weight of that decision. The fact that I saved lives by taking his doesn't eliminate the responsibility I carry for ending it. I need time to process this. I'm requesting 6 months administrative leave. The request had been approved. The next document in her file was dated 6 months later, a brief note indicating she'd returned to duty and was available for mission assignment. But Blackwood understood now why she spent 3 hours every day cleaning a rifle that could be maintained in 45 minutes. Why she developed rituals that psychology evaluations flagged as obsessive-compulsive. Why she'd internalized responsibility at a level that went beyond anything official training could instill. She wasn't maintaining a weapon. She was maintaining control over something in a world where most variables couldn't be controlled, where she could be ordered to end a human life from 2 miles away and then be expected to process that and be ready for the next mission. His phone rang, the secure line. He checked caller ID, saw only a secure extension answered. General Blackwood. General, this is General Patricia Grayson. I understand you've been reviewing some classified files this morning. Blackwood didn't recognize the name, but the rank was the same as his. Peer-to-peer communication. Yes, ma'am. Reviewing service records for one of my soldiers. Not your soldier, General. The voice was measured, professional, the tone of someone used to having difficult conversations. Master Sergeant Hale is assigned to Camp Liberty for administrative purposes only. Her operational chain of command runs through channels you don't access. I'd like to understand what I have at my facility, Blackwood said carefully. A pause. Background noise suggested Grayson was in a vehicle, probably speaking from a secure phone in a staff car. What you've stumbled on to, General, is one of our most valuable strategic assets. We don't advertise these capabilities because they provide significant advantages when properly employed. Master Sergeant Hale represents the very edge of what's possible in long-range precision engagement. The 3-200-meter shot, Blackwood said. Afghanistan 2021. Help me understand the operational context. Another pause. Longer this time. The sound of calculation deciding what could be shared. The target was planning coordinated attacks that would have resulted in mass coalition casualties. Conventional approaches were exhausted. The mission required a capability that exists at the intersection of advanced technology and exceptional human skill. Sergeant Hale provided that capability. 8 hours in position at 15,000 feet, Blackwood said, waiting for environmental conditions to align. She understands that rushing increases failure probability to unacceptable levels. That patience is part of the capability. When we assign her to a mission, we're not just deploying a skilled shooter. We're deploying someone who can evaluate complex variables and make the judgment call about when the shot is possible. The psychological evaluations suggest she's carrying a significant weight from this work. She is, Grayson acknowledged. We monitor that carefully. The mission frequency has been reduced. She receives support, though she doesn't always accept it willingly. But understand something, General. Evelyn Hale volunteered for this role. She's had opportunities to transition to training positions, administrative work, anything that would take her out of operational assignments. She chooses to continue because she believes the work matters. Blackwood thought about the handwritten note in the Afghanistan file. The soldier who understood the weight of what she did, but accepted it anyway. Why isn't she being utilized at higher profile levels, he asked. She is being utilized exactly as her capabilities require. These missions don't come frequently, maybe 6 times a year. Situations where every other option has been exhausted and the consequences of failure are strategic rather than tactical. Between those missions, she maintains readiness. That's what you're seeing at Camp Liberty. The 3-hour weapons maintenance ritual. Among other things, she trains, she mentors younger snipers, though unofficially. She studies advances in ballistic science and environmental modeling. She keeps herself at the edge of capability so that when we need her, she's ready. Blackwood glanced at his watch. 90 minutes until the case locked. There's something else you should know, Grayson continued. Evelyn has refused missions. 7 times over her career, we've presented her with an operational requirement and she's declined to execute. This surprised him. On what grounds? Moral grounds. She evaluates each mission independently, reviews the intelligence, assesses the collateral risk, examines the strategic justification, and she makes a determination, will this action save more lives than it costs? If the answer is unclear, she refuses. And command accepts that. We've learned to respect her judgment. The missions she refused, subsequent analysis suggests she was probably right to decline. She sees variables that planners miss because she's the one who has to live with the consequences of pulling the trigger. The phone call ended shortly after. Blackwood returned to the files, but with different understanding now. This wasn't just a service record. It was documentation of a soldier who'd been given extraordinary capabilities and told to use them in situations where the weight of each decision was measured in lives saved or lost. He found one final document, a mission report from 2019, Mountain Rescue Operation. 8 humanitarian aid workers captured by militants and held in a fortress built into a mountainside. The fortress was inaccessible to assault. Helicopter insertion was impossible due to terrain and air defense. The hostages were scheduled for execution within 48 hours. Evelyn had been assigned, firing position to target 2,650 meters at extreme altitude. The mission report described challenges that made Afghanistan look simple. The fortress was at 12,000 feet. The firing position was at 14,500 feet. At that altitude, every breath was a struggle. Cognitive function degraded. Simple calculations became difficult. But Evelyn had prepared, spent 3 days acclimatizing, studied the environmental patterns, learned how temperature inversions at that altitude created wind conditions that were different from anything she'd encountered at lower elevations. The shot had eliminated a guard who controlled access to the room where hostages were confined. A Delta Force team that had been staged nearby moved in immediately after the shot recovered all 8 hostages alive. The after-action report included testimony from one of the rescued aid workers. We heard a sound like a distant crack. Our guard dropped. We didn't understand what happened until soldiers appeared and told us we were being rescued. Someone had shot our captor from a distance we couldn't even see. Whoever that person was saved our lives. 41 confirmed kills, each one preventing something worse. Each one representing a decision that carried weight that showed up in psychological evaluations and obsessive-compulsive behaviors, and handwritten notes that acknowledged the cost of being a weapon. At precisely 10 a.m. his phone rang, the young captain informing him the 4 hours were complete and he'd arrived to retrieve the case in 15 minutes. Blackwood gathered the files, returned them to the case in exactly the order he'd found them. Closed the lid, heard the electronic lock engage with a soft click that sounded final. When the captain arrived, Blackwood signed the return receipt and watched the case disappear. 4 hours of access to a career that most people would never know existed. He sat in his office after the captain left, thinking about what he'd learned. Evelyn Hale was 43 years old, had been doing this work for 24 years, was carrying weight that accumulated with each mission, each decision, each shot that eliminated a threat but also ended a human life. And tomorrow morning she'd be back in the armory, cleaning her rifle with obsessive precision, maintaining readiness for the mission that might come next week or next month or next year. The mission that only she could accomplish, the shot that only she could make, the weight that only she could carry. 6 months passed like water moving through familiar channels. General Garrett Blackwood settled back into the rhythm of command. Weekly inspections, training evaluations, the administrative machinery that kept a military installation functioning with the kind of practiced efficiency that looked effortless from the outside and required constant attention from within. But every Thursday when his inspection tour took him through the armory, he found himself looking toward the corner station. Master Sergeant Evelyn Hale would be there working through her ritual. The Barrett disassembled into geometric precision. Each component inspected, cleaned, reassembled. 3 hours of absolute focus that spoke of control maintained through repetition. They'd spoken occasionally over those months. Brief professional conversations that acknowledged what Blackwood now understood about her role. He'd learned to read the subtle changes in her demeanor. The days when she seemed more focused than usual, her movements carrying tension that suggested recent return from places that didn't appear on official deployment orders. He never asked. The classified files had taught him that some questions didn't have answers he was authorized to hear. Then everything changed on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. Blackwood knew something was different the moment he saw the unmarked SUV arrive at 0500 hours. Government plates that carried no unit designation. 2 people in civilian clothes who checked credentials at the gate and were escorted directly to the secure communications facility. 3 hours later, Evelyn appeared at his office. Her expression carried the professional calm that came before difficult missions, but her eyes showed something else. Not fear, not uncertainty, just recognition that the phone had rung with a problem that required her specific solution. Sir, I'm being deployed effective immediately. I'm required to notify you as facility commander, but operational details are classified above your clearance level. Blackwood nodded. They'd practiced this conversation before, though never for real. Duration? Unknown. Mission parameters are being finalized now. I'm authorized to tell you I'll be absent from routine duties between 5 and 10 days, depending on tactical developments and environmental factors. Equipment needs we already coordinated through appropriate channels. Transportation will be arranged. I just needed to inform you officially that I'll be unavailable. She turned to leave. Blackwood almost let her go. Almost. But the 4 hours he'd spent reading those files had given him understanding that required acknowledgement. Evelyn. She stopped. Turned back. He'd used her first name only twice before, each time signaling recognition that this was different from routine military business. Come back safe. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Brief recognition that he understood what she was about to do. What she carried every time she deployed on these missions that existed in shadows of official operations. Yes, sir. That's always the plan. What General Blackwood couldn't know without clearances he'd never received was the conversation that had occurred 72 hours earlier in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C. General Patricia Grayson sat at a conference table with 5 other people. 2 wore uniforms with rank insignia indicating senior positions in Special Operations Command. 3 wore civilian clothes that suggested intelligence community affiliations. Between them sat multiple laptops displaying satellite imagery and intelligence reports that had triggered this emergency session. Target confirmation is solid, one of the civilians said, pulling up enhanced satellite photographs. Khalid Mansour, former chemical weapons specialist, Syrian government defector. He's been off our radar for 18 months. New intelligence indicates he's acquired materials and expertise to construct a radiological dispersal device. A dirty bomb. Not a nuclear weapon in the traditional sense, but conventional explosives wrapped around radioactive material. The kind of weapon designed not to destroy a city, but to contaminate it. To create panic casualties from radiation exposure, economic damage that would extend for years. Current location, Grayson asked. The satellite image shifted, zoomed to a compound in mountainous terrain. Exact coordinates were classified even in this secure briefing, but geographical features suggested somewhere along the contested Syrian border region. Remote facility. He's been there 3 weeks working on assembly. Our window is narrow. Latest intelligence suggests he'll complete the device within 96 hours and attempt to transport it to an operational target. What's the intended target? Unknown, could be regional, could be an attempt to smuggle it into Europe or CONUS. We can't risk finding out which. One of the military officers spoke up. Conventional assault options. The intelligence analyst pulled up tactical maps. Airstrike is feasible from a capability perspective, but the compound is within 2 kilometers of a civilian village. Blast radius analysis suggests between 50 and 80 civilian casualties. Additionally, releasing the radioactive materials he's already handling through an airstrike could contaminate the local water supply. Ground assault. Terrain makes vehicle approach impossible. We'd need helicopter insertion, but the militants have acquired sophisticated air defense systems, probably Russian-made manpads that we know are in the region. Time required to stage a ground operation puts us outside the intelligence window. By the time we could get operators in position, he might have already relocated with the device. Grayson knew where this was going, had known from the moment the briefing began. There were only a handful of situations that merited this kind of emergency meeting, and they all had the same solution. Distance from nearest viable firing position to the target. The tactical specialist consulted digital maps overlaid with range calculations. Optimal position is a ridgeline to the northwest. Provides line of sight to the compound. Distance is, he paused, verified the calculation, 3,587 meters. Call it 3,600 for operational planning. 2.25 miles. A distance where environmental variables compounded into chaos. Where the shot existed at the very edge of what human skill and technology combined could achieve. A distance where only one person in American military operations had successfully made a confirmed kill beyond. Can Reaper make this shot? Grayson asked. The ballistics specialist consulted their calculations. Elevation difference between potential firing position and target. Seasonal weather patterns in the region. Equipment capabilities of the Barrett M82A1 at extreme range. From a pure ballistics perspective, it's mathematically possible. The environmental factors are challenging, but manageable if conditions align. Altitude effects will be significant. Seasonal winds in that region are unpredictable. The shot would require optimal conditions, perfect calculation, and, he paused, choosing words carefully, exceptional execution under pressure. That's not what I asked, Grayson said. I asked if she can make it. The specialist looked at the satellite imagery, at the distance calculation, at the environmental data. If anyone can, she can. But sir, this would be a new world record by over 400 meters. We'd be asking her to do something no one has ever done. She's done things no one has ever done before, Grayson said. Get her on the phone. The call connected through multiple secure relays, encryption protocols layering over transmission to pathways that routed through servers on 3 continents to prevent interception. When Evelyn answered, her voice carried the calm of someone who'd received calls like this before and understood what they meant. Reaper Actual. Sergeant Hale, this is General Grayson. We have a situation that may require your specific capabilities. I'm sending you a secure data package with mission parameters. Review it and provide your assessment within 6 hours of receipt. Yes, ma'am. 6 hours. Understood. No questions, no requests for clarification. Just professional acknowledgement that a mission had been proposed and she'd evaluate whether she could execute it. 5 hours and 43 minutes later, Evelyn called back. General, I've reviewed the package. The shot is at the extreme edge of what's ballistically possible with current technology and ammunition. Environmental variables present significant challenges. Risk of collateral damage exists if environmental conditions shift during bullet flight time. Grayson waited. Evelyn's evaluations were never rushed. She'd be thinking through every variable, every risk, every potential consequence. The alternative is allowing a radiological dispersal device to be completed and deployed against a target we can't predict. That's unacceptable. I'll accept the mission with 2 conditions. Go ahead. First, I need 96 hours on site before engagement, not for basic preparation, but for extended environmental monitoring. Weather patterns in that region are chaotic. I need time to establish baseline conditions and identify stable windows. If those windows don't develop within the 96 hours, we abort and pursue alternative solutions. Agreed. Second condition. I want Sergeant Sullivan as a spotter. We've worked together for 15 years. I trust his calculations and his judgment. If conditions become non-permissive, I want someone with me who can make that call and who I'll listen to. Sullivan is already being contacted. He'll deploy with you. Anything else? Evelyn was silent for a moment. Then, ma'am, this shot is beyond anything I've attempted. The distance alone presents challenges that compound every variable. I've run the initial ballistics, and the margin for error is measured in fractions of an inch over 3,600 meters. I'm confident in my capabilities, but I need you to understand that even with optimal conditions, success is not guaranteed. I understand, Grayson said, but you're the only option we have. If you can't make this shot, we're looking at an airstrike that kills civilians or a ground assault that might not arrive in time. You're the least bad option in a situation where all options carry risk. Understood. I'll do everything in my power to make this work. I know you will. Transport is being arranged. You'll deploy within 12 hours. Now, 4 days later, Evelyn was on a mountain ridge in a country that officially the United States had no military operations in. The location was remote enough that insertion had been conducted via helicopter under cover of darkness, the aircraft flying nap of the earth to avoid radar detection by air defense systems in the region. Her hide was a natural depression in the rock barely large enough for 2 people and the equipment required for extreme long-range precision shooting. She'd been here for 90 hours, monitoring wind patterns that shifted hourly, recording temperature fluctuations that changed by 30 degrees between day and night, watching the target through optics powerful enough to read facial expressions at 3,600 meters. Wade Sullivan was with her, same spotter who'd assisted during the demonstration for General Blackwood 7 months ago. 40 years old, carrying the kind of weathered competence that came from 15 years of doing work that most people would never know about. They'd spoken fewer than 100 words in 4 days. Everything communicated through hand signals or written notes. Sound discipline was absolute. At this range, they were safe from detection, but habits formed in training saved lives when circumstances changed. Evelyn's notebook was filled with observations, wind speeds recorded every hour, temperature readings at 6-hour intervals, barometric pressure fluctuations, humidity levels. All the data that would feed into the ballistic calculation that would determine whether a .50 caliber projectile fired from this position could arrive at the target location 3,587 meters away. The compound below was active. Through the spotting scope, she could see the target moving between buildings, could watch him work on components in the central structure where intelligence suggested the device was being assembled, could observe patterns in his movement that would help predict where he'd be when, if the moment came. If the moment came. 96 hours had seemed like adequate time when she'd requested it. Now, with 90 hours elapsed, Evelyn understood she might have overestimated the environmental window. The wind patterns in this region were chaotic, Mountain thermals created updrafts and downdrafts that changed by the hour as rock heated and cooled. Morning conditions were dramatically different from afternoon, evening different from both. She needed stability, just a few hours where the wind settled into something predictable enough to calculate, where temperature held steady, where the dozen variables she couldn't control would remain constant long enough for the bullet to complete its 7-second flight. Hour 93, still waiting. Wade checked the ballistic computer, ran another calculation based on current conditions. Shook his head slightly. Wind variance was too high. The bullet would drift unpredictably during flight. Probability of hit was below acceptable threshold for a shot this critical. Evelyn didn't need the computer to tell her what she could see through the scope. Small flags they'd placed at intervals along the theoretical flight path, visible only through high magnification optics, showed wind moving in different directions at different altitudes. Chaos that made precision impossible. She settled deeper into the hide. This was the part that movies never showed correctly. Not the dramatic tension of a countdown or the action of pulling the trigger. Just hours of absolute stillness waiting for the universe to cooperate. Wade opened his own notebook, wrote a message, showed it to her, window closing. Command wants status. Evelyn pulled out the satellite phone, typed an encrypted message. Environmental conditions remain non-permissive. Wind variance too high. Continuing to monitor. Will advise when situation changes. The response came back within minutes. Understood. Intelligence update. Target activity suggests device assembly nearing completion. Time is critical. Keep us informed. She powered down the phone to preserve battery. Returned to the scope. The target was in the central building again, working on something she couldn't see clearly, but intelligence said was the final assembly of components that would turn radioactive material and conventional explosives into a weapon that could contaminate an entire city district. Hour 95. The wind began to shift. Evelyn felt it before she saw it. A change in the thermals as afternoon transitioned toward evening, the same pattern she'd observed over the past 4 days, but never stable enough for long enough. She checked the flags through the scope, saw them begin to align. Not perfectly. Nothing in nature was perfect, but trending toward consistency. Wade saw it too. Started running calculations. Updated the ballistic solution every 5 minutes as conditions continued to evolve. Hour 96. The satellite phone buzzed. Encrypted text message. An intelligence indicates device may be complete within hours. If not already departed, target will likely relocate with device tonight. This is final window for engagement. Advised status. Evelyn typed environmental conditions improving. Wind stabilizing. Require additional 90 minutes to confirm pattern holds. Will execute if window remains open. Response approved. 90 minutes. Then we need to make decision on alternative approach. Alternative approach meant airstrike. Meant accepting the civilian casualties that this mission had been designed to prevent. Meant failure. Evelyn returned to the scope. Watched the flags. Watched the environmental data update on the ballistic computer. Waited for the chaos to simplify into something calculable. 75 minutes later, Wade tapped her shoulder, pointed to the ballistic computer display. Wind conditions had stabilized. Temperature gradient was consistent. Humidity holding steady. The chaos had simplified into a pattern that could be calculated and compensated for. He ran the final numbers. 3,587 meters to target. Elevation difference, 847 feet, firing position, higher than target location. Bullet drop at this range would be approximately 980 feet. The round would fall in an arc that would horrify anyone who didn't understand the mathematics. Time of flight, 7.3 seconds. Wind drift compensation, 14.6 minutes of angle. Coriolis effect at this latitude and distance, 9.2 inches right. The numbers that turned physics into precision. Evelyn verified the calculations manually. Pulled out her notebook, worked through the equations the computer processed instantly. Not because she didn't trust the technology, but because understanding the math meant understanding where variables could shift and how to compensate. The math confirmed what the computer showed. The shot was possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible if everything aligned and execution was perfect. Through the scope, the target was visible near the central building. Pattern analysis over 4 days suggested he'd move into the open area in approximately 30 minutes. Same routine he'd followed every day. Behavioral pattern providing the predictability needed for extreme range engagement. 30 minutes to prepare. To verify equipment one final time. To settle breathing, heart rate into the rhythm that made precision possible. Evelyn began the ritual she'd performed 41 times before. Equipment verification. Rifle bore clean, inspected with a bore light that showed the lands and grooves of the rifling sharp and clean. Action functioning smoothly, bolt sliding without friction or resistance. Optics calibrated to environmental conditions. Ammunition selected from the batch that had shown most consistent performance during testing, 5 rounds set aside, though she'd only need one if everything went right. Environmental monitoring. Wind flags showing stable patterns across all altitude bands. Temperature holding at 62 degrees, consistent across the engagement distance. Barometric pressure steady. All the variables aligning into a window that wouldn't last forever but might last long enough. Physical preparation. Breathing exercises to lower heart rate from the elevated levels that came from knowing what she was about to attempt. Muscle relaxation techniques to eliminate microtremors that would be magnified over 3,600 meters. Mental focus narrowing to exclude everything except the mathematics of trajectory and the discipline of execution. Wade monitored the target, provided updates in handwritten notes. 20 minutes. Pattern holding. Target following expected movement. 15 minutes. Environmental conditions still stable. Wind holding 10 minutes. Target entering final building before expected emergence. Evelyn settled into firing position. The Barrett's weight distributed perfectly across the bipod and rear support. Buttstock against shoulder fitted and adjusted over 4 days to ensure perfect placement. Cheek weld on the rest eye aligned with scope at the precise relief distance where the image was clearest. Through the optics, the compound appeared closer but still impossibly far. 3,587 meters translated to over 2 miles. At this distance, a human being was a collection of pixels, even through 25 power magnification. She found the aiming point, not where the target was now, but where he would be, where 7 seconds of flight time and nearly 1,000 feet of bullet drop and wind drift and Earth's rotation would converge if everything worked perfectly. Wade provided the countdown. 5 minutes to expected emergence based on pattern analysis. Evelyn controlled her breathing. Deep breath in through the nose. Slow exhale through the mouth. Let the oxygen settle. Find the rhythm between heartbeats where the body was stillest. 3 minutes. Final scope adjustment. Elevation 62.4 minutes of angle. Nearly vertical compensation for the arc. The bullet would travel. Windage 14.6 MOA right. Compensating for the steady wind that would push the projectile during its journey through 3.5 seconds of flight. 2 minutes. The world narrowed, existed only in the circle of magnified vision. The compound, the door where the target would emerge, the path he would walk, the exact point where bullet and body would intersect if timing and calculation and execution all aligned. 1 minute. The door opened. Khalid Mansour stepped into the evening light, moved exactly as pattern predicted, walking from the central building toward the northern structure. 30 paces, same route he'd walked at this time for 4 days. Evelyn found him in the scope, not aiming at him yet, just tracking, observing, waiting for the moment when he'd reach the precise point where all variables converged. 20 paces, breathing steady, heart rate controlled, finger moving to the trigger, not touching yet, just ready. 15 paces, wind holding, temperature stable. Every environmental factor that could shift was momentarily aligned in a configuration that made the impossible briefly achievable. 10 paces, the mathematics in her head faster than conscious thought. Trajectory arc, wind drift, Coriolis effect, flight time. The bullet's path through space calculated and recalculated and verified against the computer's solution. 5 paces, the crosshair settling on empty air ahead of and above the walking figure, leading the target. Accounting for the 7.3 seconds the bullet would spend traveling. Trusting the math, trusting the preparation, trusting 24 years of experience that said when everything aligned like this, the shot was possible. He reached the designated point. Evelyn's finger took up the trigger slack. The Barrett's trigger was set at 4 pounds of pressure. She knew exactly how it felt. Had dry fired this rifle 10,000 times. Knew the moment before the sear released and the hammer fell. The respiratory pause. The space between heartbeats. The moment of absolute stillness that existed for a fraction of a second but felt eternal. She pressed the trigger. The Barrett's report shattered the silence of the mountain. The recoil drove back against her shoulder with force that would have dislocated an unprepared shooter's collarbone. The muzzle blast kicked up dust and small rocks, the overpressure from the .50 caliber round radiating outward in a shockwave that could be felt 50 feet away. Through the scope, Evelyn stayed on target. Couldn't track the bullet itself, too fast, too small, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, initially slowing but still supersonic when it arrived. Could only wait. 7.3 seconds. The longest seconds of her life, every single time. The figure stumbled, fell, didn't move. Wade was already on the spotting scope, high magnification optics focused on the target area. Target down, no movement. Stand by for confirmation. 30 seconds of observation. The kind of clinical assessment that verified a hit versus a miss, a kill versus a wound mission, success versus continued threat. Confirmed, Wade said quietly. Target eliminated. No secondary movement. Engagement successful. Evelyn engaged the safety, exhaled the breath she'd been holding without realizing. 42. The number increased by 1. Another face that would join the collection she saw when she closed her eyes. She began breaking down the equipment, muscle memory taking over while her conscious mind processed what had just occurred. 3,587 meters. The longest confirmed kill shot in military history. A record that would exist only in classified files known by a handful of people with appropriate clearances. The achievement meant nothing to her. The distance was just a number. What mattered was that a weapon capable of killing thousands would never be completed. A threat had been eliminated at a range that prevented any other form of engagement. Mission success. Strategic objective achieved. The personal cost was something she'd calculate later. Wade was already on the satellite phone reporting to command. Reaper actual to Overwatch. Engagement successful. Target neutralized. Requesting extraction authorization. The response came back quickly. A ground team that had been staged nearby would secure the compound, verify the kill, collect intelligence and materials related to the device. Evelyn and Wade's extraction helicopter would arrive in 90 minutes. Evelyn continued packing equipment with methodical precision, every piece cleaned and secured. No evidence left that would indicate their position. Professional tradecraft that had been drilled into her through years of operations. Wade finished the radio communication, turned to her. That was, he paused, searching for words. That was the most impressive shot I've ever seen, and I've been spotting for you for 15 years. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Was disassembling the Barrett, each component handled with care that bordered on reverence. 42, she finally said. Wade understood. You okay? Ask me in 6 months. Fair enough. He knew better than to push. Knew that Evelyn processed missions in her own time, her own way. The satellite phone buzzed again. Different sender. Evelyn checked the screen, saw a priority message from command. Secondary intel. Update post-mission analysis indicates target maintained deadman protocol. Sleeper cell activated upon 72-hour missed check-in. Contingency assets being deployed to address secondary threat. You are not required for follow-up operations. Mission parameters achieved within scope of original tasking. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time. The bomb maker was dead. The radiological device would never be completed. Those mission objectives had been achieved with precision at 3,587 meters. But killing him had activated a backup plan she hadn't been briefed on. Somewhere another team was dealing with sleeper cells that had been triggered by her success. Dealing with consequences that emerged from the elimination of the primary threat. She'd made the perfect shot, had achieved every parameter of the mission as it had been presented to her. But perfect shots didn't guarantee clean outcomes. They never did. The phone buzzed again. General Grayson's secure line. Sleeper cell situation contained. 8 operatives in custody, 3 eliminated during arrest operations. No civilian casualties. Your mission prevented primary threat and forced secondary assets into exposure where they could be addressed. Strategic outcome, decisive success. Strategic outcome, decisive success. That was how command evaluated these missions. Calculate the benefits, measure against costs, determine if action was justified. Evelyn evaluated differently. 1 man dead at 3,587 meters. 8 others now in custody or dead because his elimination had triggered their activation. Had those 8 been planning attacks, or had they been dormant assets who would have remained inactive if their handler hadn't been killed? She'd never know. That information would be classified in someone else's files, analyzed by intelligence officers she'd never meet. She'd only know that she'd pulled the trigger and the consequences had rippled outward in ways she couldn't predict or control. 42 confirmed kills. How many unconfirmed consequences? Wade found her 20 minutes later, still sitting with the phone staring at mountains that held secrets she'd never fully understand. You good? He asked. Yeah, Evelyn said. The automatic response. Mission complete. Target eliminated. Strategic outcome positive. Wade knew her well enough to hear what she wasn't saying, knew that mission complete and at peace with outcome weren't the same thing. Want to talk about it? No. Want to not talk about it together? Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. That was Wade, 15 years of partnership, understanding when silence was more valuable than words. Yeah, that would help. They sat together for 10 minutes, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed this moment without caring about the human drama that had just played out. Then Wade stood. Extraction in 45 minutes. I'm going to do final sweep of the hide, make sure we didn't leave anything. You good here? Yeah, give me 5 minutes. When she was alone, Evelyn pulled out her personal notebook, the one she kept separate from official mission logs, personal observations that would never appear in classified files or after-action reports. Mission 42, 3,587 meters. Target radiological device specialist. Environmental factors. Mountain thermals, 96-hour wait for stable conditions. Shot successful. Target eliminated. She paused, pen hovering over paper. Aftermath. Sleeper cell activated by target's death. 8 additional arrests/casualties. Strategic outcome classified as decisive success. Mathematical analysis suggests mission justified, prevented radiological attack that could have killed thousands. Triggered secondary response that exposed dormant threats. Personal assessment made the longest shot anyone has ever made. Saved lives that will never know they were in danger. Created consequences I'll never fully understand. The math says success. The weight says otherwise. This is why I spend 3 hours every day cleaning a rifle. Control what I can control, except that some variables will always remain unknown. She closed the notebook. Some evaluations couldn't be calculated using ballistics or probability. Some weights couldn't be measured in any units that appeared on official reports, but they still had to be carried. The extraction helicopter arrived exactly on schedule. Evelyn and Wade loaded equipment, climbed aboard, lifted off into darkness. Below, the compound was being secured by a team that had been waiting for her shot to clear the way. They'd verify the kill, secure materials, collect intelligence. Evelyn would never see the official confirmation. Would submit her after-action report to people whose names she wouldn't learn. Would return to Camp Liberty and resume the routine that kept her ready for the next impossible mission. 3 months later, General Garrett Blackwood was conducting his Thursday inspection tour through the armory at Camp Liberty. In the far corner, Master Sergeant Evelyn Hale sat at her maintenance station. The Barrett M82A1 disassembled in perfect geometric arrangement, each component cleaned with surgical precision, the ritual that had become her constant. Blackwood noticed something different. A second badge on her uniform placed on the inside pocket flap, where it would only be visible when the fabric shifted. 3,600 meters. Confirmed, he understood immediately. She'd been deployed on the mission that had taken her away for 9 days 3 months ago. Had accomplished something no one else in military history had achieved. A shot that would exist only in classified records acknowledged by a handful of people with appropriate clearances. He approached the maintenance station. Sergeant Hale, she looked up, acknowledged him with professional courtesy. Still maintaining the 3-hour ritual. Yes, sir, every day. Her hands continued working. Bolt carrier sliding into receiver, locking lugs engaging, the soft click of metal on metal that spoke of perfect fit and proper function. Keeps the weapon ready, she continued. Keeps me sharp. Keeps me prepared for when I'm needed. Blackwood nodded. Didn't ask about the new badge. Didn't congratulate her on the achievement. Some records weren't meant for headlines. Some accomplishments existed beyond recognition. I read something interesting in a classified intelligence summary, he said carefully, about a radiological threat that was neutralized through precision application of force. Strategic outcome was described as decisive. Evelyn's hands paused for just a moment. I'm not authorized to discuss classified operations, sir. I understand. I just wanted you to know that some of us who operate at certain clearance levels understand the importance of the work being done, even if we can't acknowledge it publicly. Yes, sir. Appreciate that. Blackwood started to walk away, then paused. Evelyn, how do you deal with the weight, the responsibility of being the person who can do what no one else can do? For the first time, real emotion showed in her expression. Not much. Developments in ballistic science. Developments in ballistic science, I stay ready. And I trust that when I'm given a mission, it's because every other option has been exhausted, and the consequences of inaction are worse than the consequences of action. She paused, choosing words carefully. The weight is part of the job. I accepted that a long time ago. The ritual helps. The preparation helps. Knowing that I'm doing work that matters helps, but the weight is always there. I've learned to carry it. Blackwood understood. Sometimes the best soldiers were the ones who understood the cost of what they did and accepted it anyway. Not because it was easy, but because someone had to. Carry on, soldier. Evelyn returned to her work, the Barrett coming together under her practiced hands. Tomorrow she'd disassemble it again. And the day after that. The ritual would continue until the next mission came. The mission that only she could accomplish. The shot that only she could make. 6 months later, life at Camp Liberty continued its familiar rhythm. Evelyn maintained her ritual. Wade Sullivan worked with other sniper teams, passing on knowledge gained through 15 years of spotting for the best shooter the military had ever produced. General Blackwood commanded the facility with the understanding that some of his soldiers operated in shadows he'd never fully see. On a Tuesday morning, Evelyn's satellite phone buzzed. Encrypted message, priority channel. She read it twice, then began packing equipment. Wade appeared at her station 20 minutes later. Got the call too. Where this time? Classified until we're in transit, but it's another long shot. How long? Does it matter? Wade smiled. Not really. You'll make it work. You always do. They left that afternoon, destination unknown to anyone at Camp Liberty. Mission parameters classified at levels that required special access. Environmental challenges that would require patience and precision and the kind of partnership that came from 15 years of working together. Somewhere in the world, a threat existed that conventional forces couldn't address. A situation where the consequences of failure were unacceptable and every other option had been exhausted. And somewhere on a mountain or in a desert or on a rooftop overlooking a compound, Evelyn would set up her equipment, would monitor environmental conditions, would run calculations that turned physics into precision, would wait for the moment when all variables aligned, would make the shot that only she could make, would carry the weight that came with being the best. The Barrett M82A1 sat in its case clean to perfection, ready for employment at ranges where most people couldn't even see the target, ready for the impossible. Again.